Anthony Tony Price, a titan of New York real estate at a steely 35, was used to empires rising and falling at his command. His confidence, a skyscraper in itself, often teetered on the edge of pure, unadulterated stubbornness. Advice from others? He usually filed it under irrelevant. But tonight, the city that never slept had gnawed him down. He slumped into his Upper East Side penthouse, the day's battles, hostile negotiations, Shark Tank board meetings, an endless barrage of calls, clinging to him like the expensive but suffocating fabric of his suit. He tossed the jacket onto a pristine cream armchair, the silence of the opulent space broken only by the seductive, low thrum of jazz drifting from the living area. Angelica, his wife, materialized from the shadows like a Bond girl, a vision in a silken robe, a glass of deep crimson Merlot already in hand, her smile as flawless and expensive as the diamonds dripping from her ears. "Darling, tough day at the office?" Her voice was a velvet caress, but Tony, a connoisseur of nuance in high-stakes deals, detected an almost imperceptible tremor, a faint, discordant note that pricked his weary senses. "Exhausted," he grumbled, accepting the proffered glass. "Just want to eat and forget the wolves exist for a few hours." He leaned in for a peck on her cheek, a perfunctory gesture, trying to mask the irritation simmering beneath his fatigue. He knew that glint in her eye. "Perfect! I had Chef Dubois whip up those Wagyu steaks you adore," she purred, her eyes flashing with a pleasure that seemed almost predatory. Tony just grunted, heading to the master suite to change. Minutes later, showered and clad in a cashmere sweater, he sat at the polished mahogany dining table. The aroma was indeed divine. "Smells incredible," he admitted, pouring himself another generous measure of wine. Angelica, across from him, dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her movements a study in practiced elegance as she picked up her knife and fork. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware against porcelain, a soundtrack to unspoken tensions. Finally, Tony broke the silence. "So, what dramas unfolded in your world today, Ange?" he asked, a piece of perfectly seared steak halfway to his lips. He expected talk of charity luncheons or gallery openings. Angelica paused, a theatrical beat, her gaze, usually flitting and bright, sharpened, locking onto his. "Actually, I ran into Veronica Sterling at Saks. You know, Victor Maxwell's latest associate?" She let the implication hang. "And she let slip the most fascinating little secret." Tony raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Oh? And what fascinating little secret would that be from the lion's den?" Angelica savored the moment, her eyes flicking over his face, gauging his reaction. "Her dear Victor, he's also making a play for that colossal Hudson Yards contract, darling. The very same one you're chasing." She delivered the line with the calm precision of a sniper, her slender fingers curled around the stem of her wineglass. "Maxwell," Tony murmured, the name a bitter taste in his mouth. The information spun in his head like a rogue stock ticker. This changed things. This made the already high stakes astronomical. The name Victor Maxwell echoed in the opulent dining room, a name synonymous with ruthless ambition and deals that often skirted the very edge of legality. Tony chewed slowly, the expensive Wagyu suddenly tasting like ash. Maxwell sniffing around the Hudson Yards project? That wasn't just competition. It was a declaration of war. Angelica watched him, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Darling, why don't you just sign the damn thing with our current partners, lock it down, then we can finally take that trip to St. Bart's. Don't we deserve a break from this pressure?" Her hand, adorned with a rock that could fund a small nation, gestured vaguely around the luxurious room, as if even this level of affluence was a gilded cage. Tony sighed, rubbing his temples. The familiar throb of a tension headache was starting. "Ange, it's not that simple. This isn't just about a vacation. This deal, it's got more moving parts than a Swiss watch, and if one gear grinds, the whole thing collapses." "But you said yourself, the terms they're offering are incredible," Angelica pressed, her voice gaining a sharper, more insistent edge. "Everyone in the city is talking about what a coup it would be for Price Holdings. This is about solidifying our legacy, Tony. Think of the money, the power. You always say business needs to keep moving forward, devouring or being devoured. I know, he conceded, pushing his plate away. But something feels off, too smooth. I need to go over every clause, every subclause with a damn electron microscope. I'm not risking the company, my company, on a hunch or a rushed signature. Angelica's perfectly sculpted lips thinned. She crossed her arms, the silk of her robe shimmering with her barely suppressed frustration. You're too cautious, Tony. Always looking for the thundercloud in a blue sky. Sometimes you just have to grab what's yours and not sweat the small stuff. Tony's patience, already frayed, snapped. He slowly placed his fork and knife down, his gaze hardening. This isn't small stuff, Angelica. This is my life's work, my responsibility. If this goes south, I'm the one whose head is on the chopping block, not the society columnists or your lunch companions. She rolled her eyes, a flash of genuine anger breaking through her polished facade. Oh, please, you act like the fate of the free world rests on this one decision. In my world, Angelica, it practically does, he retorted, the air crackling between them. A tense, heavy silence descended, thick enough to choke on. Angelica was the first to break. Her voice softened, but the underlying steel remained. I just want us to live the life we deserve, Tony. The life people at our level expect. I'm tired of waiting for you to stop second-guessing every golden opportunity. Tony let out a weary breath. Let's not do this tonight, Ange. I really am beat. He knew this argument, every beat, every predictable crescendo. Her lips tightened into a moue of displeasure, but she said no more. She knew when to retreat, to regroup, to plot her next move. He drained his wine and pushed back his chair. I'm going to my study. Need to look over some things. Angelica watched him go, her eyes narrowed in thought. As the heavy oak door of his study clicked shut, she allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. He'd come around. He always did. The early morning sun, filtered through the panoramic windows of Tony Price's study, cast long shadows across the room. The space, usually a sanctuary of focused ambition, felt more like a war room. Spread across the massive mahogany desk were stacks of documents, blueprints, and financial projections related to the Hudson Yards deal. Tony, hunched over in his leather executive chair, hadn't slept much. The conversation with Angelica, coupled with the disquieting too-good-to-be-true nature of the contract, had replayed in his mind all night. The terms were undeniably lucrative, almost suspiciously so. It was the kind of deal that could make careers or break them spectacularly. He rubbed his tired eyes, took off his reading glasses, and leaned back with a deep sigh. Damn it, he muttered, staring at the ceiling. Something just didn't add up. A soft knock. Tony? Angelica's voice, melodic and bright. He'd hoped for a few more minutes of solitude, but knew the reprieve was over. Come in. She swept in, a vision in a cream-colored cashmere lounge set, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, a small plate of croissants in the other. Her smile was dazzling, a stark contrast to the tension of the previous night. Morning, sleepyhead. I brought your favorites. Her eyes, however, held a spark of keen anticipation. She placed the offerings on a clear corner of his desk. So, my love, she began, her tone casual but her gaze unwavering. Have you had a chance to look over that pesky contract again? Is it as perfect as I said? Tony took a slow sip of the coffee. It was strong, just how he liked it. I'm still looking at it from a different angle, Ange, he said, choosing his words carefully. It feels too polished, almost like a trap. Angelica's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Oh, Tony, don't be difficult. It's an ideal deal. The whole city's buzzing about its benefits. You wouldn't want to let this slip through your fingers to someone like Maxwell, would you? He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the papers, which only seemed to fuel her irritation. For God's sake, Tony! She exclaimed, her voice rising. Why do you always have to complicate things? It's straightforward. Sign the contract, we celebrate, we go on that vacation, we invest in new ventures. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Tony slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. His voice was low, weary. I'm not signing anything until I'm 100% certain it's the right move, Angelica. Not for you, not for St. Bart's, not for anyone. You are infuriatingly stubborn, she cried, jumping up. All you have to do is put your damn signature on a piece of paper. Or do you actually enjoy stringing me along, keeping me in suspense? Angelica, please! Tony's voice was hoarse with exhaustion. Just give me some time. This isn't a game. She scowled, her lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Fine, Tony. Take your precious time, she clipped out, then spun on her heel and marched out, the click of her mules echoing her frustration. He closed his eyes, his head throbbing. The pressure from his wife was relentless, but he couldn't let emotion cloud his judgment. Not with this much at stake. He needed to focus, to find the flaw he knew was lurking somewhere in the fine print. Later that morning, at the price-holding skyscraper in Midtown, Tony strode into his corner office, preoccupied. He almost collided with the cleaning lady, a quiet, unassuming woman he vaguely recognized. Victoria Evans, according to the name tag, almost hidden by her drab uniform. She was dusting the bookshelves, her movements methodical and silent. Oh, excuse me, are you finished in here? He asked, a little surprised to see her. Victoria Evans flinched, startled by his sudden appearance. She didn't say a word, merely looked him in the eyes for a fleeting second, nodded curtly, gathered her cleaning caddy, and scurried out. Tony frowned. Strange. He knew most of the support staff by name, at least the ones on his floor. They were usually chatty, or at least offered a polite, "Good morning, Mr. Price." This one, it was like she was a ghost. He shrugged it off. He had bigger fish to fry, namely Victor Maxwell, and a contract that felt like a beautiful, venomous snake. The morning at Price Holdings was a blur of activity, but Tony's mind remained fixated on the Hudson Yards contract and Angelica's relentless pressure. He'd told her he'd decide by the end of the week, a small concession to buy some peace, and she'd immediately started talking about booking flights to the Caymans. He knew this deal meant more to her than just business. It was a ticket to a higher echelon of social status, a glittering world of unimaginable luxury and recognition she craved, and he, fool that he sometimes was, just wanted her to be happy. He finally picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he landed on the name, Victor Maxwell. He took a deep breath. Mr. Maxwell, it's Tony Price. I've reviewed your proposal for the Hudson Yards partnership. I'm prepared to move forward. He tried to sound confident, decisive, the master of his universe. A brief, charged silence crackled over the line. Then Maxwell's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, but with an undercurrent of predatory satisfaction, purred back. Ah, Tony, excellent news. I knew you'd see the mutual benefits. I can be at your office within the hour. We can seal this over a celebratory drink. Tony nodded to himself, though Maxwell couldn't see it. Make it my conference room. 1 hour. He hung up, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach despite the outward bravado. He leaned back in his custom-made Italian leather chair, trying to quell the persistent, nagging voice that whispered, this was all too easy. An hour later, the scene was set. Tony sat at one end of the massive, polished oak conference table. Opposite him, Victor Maxwell, immaculate in a bespoke charcoal suit, exuded an aura of confident power. His smile, however, never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Documents lay spread between them, alongside pens and 2 crystal tumblers already filled with amber liquid. Maxwell's preferred single malt, a power play in itself. Well, Tony, Maxwell began, swirling the whiskey in his glass. This agreement, my friend, is more than just paper. It's the foundation of a highly profitable collaboration, a monument to our shared vision. He raised his glass. I believe you're making a very astute choice. Tony picked up the Mont Blanc pen, its weight familiar in his hand. He looked at Maxwell, then down at the signature line. With a decisive stroke, he signed. Anthony Price. Relief, surprisingly potent, washed over him. Another mountain climbed, another victory for Price Holdings. The ink was still wet when Maxwell, with a satisfied smirk, countersigned. Excellent, Maxwell declared, swiftly gathering the signed documents and sliding them into a sleek leather briefcase. I'll await your team's final confirmations. This is the beginning of something big, Price. He extended a hand. Tony shook it, a firm professional grip. He escorted Maxwell to the elevators, the picture of a successful tycoon who had just closed a multi-billion-dollar deal. Returning to his office, Tony stretched, a genuine smile finally gracing his lips. He felt a sense of accomplishment, the unease momentarily banished. Maybe Angelica was right. Maybe he had been overthinking it. Millions, no, billions were now within reach. The city was his oyster. He was about to pour himself a celebratory scotch when a small, hesitant voice piped up from the doorway. Excuse me, mister? Tony turned, startled. Standing in the doorway of his expansive office was a little girl, no older than 7 or 8, with enormous, intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to absorb everything. She clutched a well-loved storybook to her chest and shifted nervously from one foot to the other. He recognized her vaguely. She sometimes accompanied her mother, Victoria Evans, the quiet cleaning lady. "Well, hello there, sweetheart," Tony said, his voice softening. He had a soft spot for kids, a stark contrast to his boardroom persona. "What can I do for you? Are you looking for your mom?" The girl, Iris, took a hesitant step into the room. Then, with a sudden seriousness that was unnerving in one so young, she looked directly at him. "Excuse me, mister," she said, her small voice surprisingly firm. "But that contract, the one that man just signed, it's a fake." Tony almost laughed. A child's fantasy, perhaps. But then he caught her gaze. Steady, unwavering, utterly serious. A cold dread, sharp and unexpected, pierced through his earlier elation. What do you mean, honey?" he asked, his smile faltering. Iris pointed a small finger towards the copy of the contract still lying on his desk. "There's a mistake in it," she said, walking closer. "My mommy found it when she was cleaning in here earlier. She showed me. She said it's not right." Tony frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. He picked up the document, his earlier confidence evaporating like mist. Following Iris's small pointing finger, he scanned the paragraph she indicated, and then he saw it. A subtle but crucial discrepancy in a legal clause, a turn of phrase that was not just awkward, but potentially ruinous. His blood ran cold. He flipped through the pages, his heart pounding. Another anomaly, a signature on an appendix, looked off, not quite his. "Wait a minute," he muttered, his mind racing. How could this be? He'd read it, or so he thought. Had Maxwell pulled a switch? He looked at Iris, who stood there with a child's innocent pride, as if she'd just solved a complex puzzle. "Mommy says they swapped the papers on you, mister," she stated matter-of-factly. "She said the real one was different." Tony shot to his feet, his mind reeling. Swapped papers? It was a classic con, something out of a cheap spy novel. Yet here it was, playing out in his billion-dollar world. He had to find Victoria Evans, immediately. "Iris, where's your mom right now?" he asked, his voice urgent. "She's in the archive room downstairs," Iris replied, looking a little scared by his sudden intensity. "She said she had to finish sorting some old files." Tony didn't waste a second. He strode out of his office, Iris trotting to keep up, his mind a maelstrom of questions. Had he been played? By Maxwell? And who else? The implications were terrifying. He found Victoria in the dimly lit, cavernous archive room, surrounded by towering shelves of old ledgers and document boxes. She looked up startled as he burst in. "Is it true?" Tony demanded, his voice sharp, holding out the damning contract. "This contract? Iris said you found an error, that the papers were switched." Victoria Evans looked from the contract to her daughter, then back to Tony. Her usually impassive face was pale. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in the fabric of her uniform. The air in the archive room suddenly felt heavy, charged with unspoken secrets. Victoria Evans stood frozen in the dusty silence of the archive room, Tony Price's accusatory gaze burning into her. The damning contract trembled slightly in his outstretched hand. "Well?" Tony pressed, his voice a low growl. "Did you know these documents were fakes?" Victoria's eyes darted towards her daughter, Iris, who stood by Tony's side, looking small and vulnerable amidst the towering shelves. She seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. This morning when I was tidying your office, Mr. Price, before Mr. Maxwell arrived, I noticed the documents on your desk. The top one. It looked different from the draft I'd seen glimpses of before. I saw an error, a significant one. Tony's eyes narrowed. A draft you'd seen glimpses of? How? This quiet, unassuming cleaner seemed to know more than she let on. Sometimes, when I clean late and your office is empty, I see things, she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. Blueprints, contracts left out. I have an eye for detail. It's a habit. A habit? Tony echoed, incredulous. You saw a multi-billion-dollar contract was tampered with, and you said nothing until your daughter spilled the beans? Why, Victoria? Why keep silent? He wasn't just surprised anymore. He was bewildered, a hint of betrayal creeping into his tone. He had trusted his environment, his team, the very air in his building. Victoria remained silent, her face a mask of apprehension. A faint flush crept up her neck. Seeing his genuine distress, the sheer panic now dawning in his eyes as the implications of the switched contract began to sink in, she finally met his gaze. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she spoke, her voice gaining a strange, unexpected strength. Mr. Price, Tony, she began, her voice now laced with a weariness that went far beyond a long day's work. I wasn't always a cleaner. Before I had to disappear, I was a corporate lawyer, a damn good one. The words hung in the stale air of the archive. Tony took an involuntary step back, stunned. A lawyer? This woman, who silently emptied his trash and dusted his awards, had once navigated the same treacherous legal waters he did? I had to leave that life behind, Victoria continued, her voice dropping again, laced with a fear that was palpable. I stumbled onto a massive corruption scandal involving some very dangerous people. Organized crime, Mr. Price. The kind of people who don't forgive or forget. I testified. Then I ran. Changed my name. Took jobs like this. Anything to stay off their radar. To protect Iris. Her eyes welled up, but she fought back the tears. So, yes, I saw the discrepancies. I knew what they meant, but I was terrified. Speaking up would have meant exposing myself. Putting Iris in danger. I didn't know who to trust. I still don't. Tony struggled to process the torrent of information. A cleaner who was a fugitive lawyer hiding from the mob had just saved his company from potential ruin? It was a plot twist crazier than any movie. And you think I shouldn't have known this? His voice was now softer, the anger replaced by a dawning understanding and a sliver of fear for her. How long could you have kept this quiet, Victoria? She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and a strange, defiant pride. I understand this is a lot, and I know they're trying to set you up, Mr. Price. But given my situation, my past, I couldn't just walk into your office and say, by the way, your multi-billion-dollar deal is a sham and, oh, I'm on the run from gangsters. Who would believe me? What would you have done? What do I do with this now? Tony asked, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He looked at the fraudulent contract, then at Victoria. Her next words were barely a whisper, but they hit him like a physical blow. I don't know, Mr. Price, but you need to think. Who benefits the most from your downfall? She paused, then added, her eyes darting nervously around the archive room as if the shadows themselves had ears. And who has the connections to pull off something this audacious? Tony Price sat in his vast, silent office, the fraudulent contract lying on his desk like a coiled viper. Victoria Evans's story replayed in his mind, a lawyer on the run, a life derailed by organized crime. And now, somehow, her past was intersecting with his present, threatening to drag him into a similar abyss. Someone in his orbit had betrayed him, masterminded this elaborate deception. But who? His deputy, Mark Jenkins, a man he'd trusted implicitly for over a decade? Or one of his partners, men with whom he'd built fortunes, shared whiskeys and battle plans? The thought was a cold stone in his gut. His fingers, almost of their own accord, moved to his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past the glittering names of Wall Street and City Hall, until he found it. Jack Rourke. Private Investigations. Rourke was an old-school PI, a relic from a grittier New York, a man whose discretion was as legendary as his results. Tony knew that calling him meant admitting he'd lost control, that his gilded world had been breached. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd never imagined needing a detective to clean up his own house. The voice that answered was gravelly, laconic. "Rourke." "Jack, it's Tony Price," Tony began, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. "I have a situation, a delicate matter that requires your particular expertise." A pause on the other end, then Rourke's characteristic grunt. "Price. Long time. Trouble finds you in the penthouses too, eh? What's the dirt?" Tony took a deep breath, his voice dropping. "Someone switched critical documents in a major deal. I think I have a traitor in my inner circle. I need to know who and why." He paused, letting the words sink in. "All right, Price. I get the picture," Rourke said, his tone all business now. "Where and when can we talk? This ain't a phone conversation." "An hour," Tony replied swiftly, wanting to strike while the iron was hot before his resolve wavered. "The Stardust Diner, corner of Lex and 51st. You know it?" "Know it? I practically lived there," Rourke rasped. "See you in 60. After hanging up, Tony paced his office like a caged panther. The sheer audacity of the betrayal stunned him. He'd built his empire on trust, on shrewd judgment of character, or so he'd thought. Now, every handshake, every smile, every past loyalty felt tainted, suspect. An hour later, Tony slid into a worn vinyl booth at the Stardust Diner. The air hung thick with the smell of old coffee and frying onions, a world away from his usual haunts. Jack Rourke sat opposite him, nursing a black coffee. He was a man of indeterminate middle age, his face a roadmap of late nights and hard truths, a slightly rumpled trench coat draped over the back of the booth despite the mild weather. He looked like he'd seen too much of the city's underbelly and wasn't impressed by any of it. He just watched the street traffic, his eyes missing nothing. Rourke finally turned his gaze to Tony, a silent invitation to speak. "All right, Price, lay it on me." Tony leaned forward, the diner's low hum a surprisingly confidential backdrop. "I need to know who faked these documents," he repeated, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's all too intricate. Someone close to me wants to bring me down. Hard." Rourke listened intently, his expression unreadable, as Tony recounted the events, omitting Victoria's full backstory for now, focusing on the switched contract and the potential suspects. "So your deputy, Jenkins," Rourke summarized, stirring his coffee with a cheap spoon. "Loyal for years, you say? Or one of these high-flying partners you've made millions with? Anyone got a motive? Gambling debts? A secret grudge? A new blonde with expensive tastes?" Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mark? I can't imagine it. As for the partners, we've had disagreements, sure, business is business. But this is personal. It's designed to cripple me." He felt a chill despite the diner's warmth. "I just don't know who to trust anymore, Jack." Rourke's eyes, shrewd and penetrating, held Tony's. "Think hard, Price. Who had access? Who knew the stakes? And who, when you really get down to it, has the balls and the connections to try and screw over Tony Price?" He took another sip of coffee. "I'll need access to your files, communication logs, the works. I'll start by sniffing around your golden boy deputy and these partners of yours. See who twitches." Tony nodded, a sliver of hope igniting. He pulled out his phone, already preparing to transfer the necessary access codes. "Whatever you need, Jack, just find them." As Rourke began scrolling through the initial data, Tony felt a grim certainty settle in. The investigation had begun. There was no turning back now. The days that followed were a torment for Tony Price. While Jack Rourke delved into the murky depths of Price Holdings' inner workings, Tony found himself adrift in a sea of suspicion. Every friendly smile from a colleague felt like a potential mask, every casual conversation a possible deception. He was navigating his own company like a spy in enemy territory, the betrayal a raw wound that refused to heal. The image of the fraudulent contract and the quiet courage of Victoria Evans were seared into his brain. Late one evening, driving home through the glittering canyons of Manhattan, his mind still churning, Tony found himself on a familiar route. As he passed Serafina's, an intimate little bistro favored by the city's elite for discreet liaisons, his foot instinctively eased off the accelerator. Something caught his eye. A flicker of movement, a familiar silhouette in the warm glow of the restaurant's window. His blood turned to ice. There, at a secluded corner table, sat Angelica, his wife. And leaning in, whispering in her ear, his hand possessively on hers, was none other than Victor Maxwell. As Tony watched, frozen, Maxwell leaned closer and pressed a lingering kiss to Angelica's cheek. She didn't pull away. She smiled. A red mist descended over Tony's vision. He didn't even remember parking the car, his actions driven by a primal surge of fury and disbelief. One moment he was on the street, the next he was storming through Serafina's ornate doors, the maitre d's' startled protests lost in the roar in his ears. His steps were heavy, purposeful, drawing stares from the other diners. He marched directly to their table. "What in the hell is going on here?" Tony's voice, raw and accusatory, ripped through the bistro's hushed ambiance. Angelica gasped, her eyes widening in genuine shock as she looked up. Victor Maxwell, however, merely raised an eyebrow, a smug, knowing smirk playing on his lips. "Tony, darling!" Angelica stammered, jumping to her feet, color draining from her face. It's not what it looks like. Victor was just... We were discussing a charity gala." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held a new, cold resolve that Tony had never seen. It was chilling. "Seriously, Angelica?" Tony spat, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He ignored her, his furious gaze locking onto Maxwell. He grabbed the front of Maxwell's expensive silk shirt, yanking him halfway out of his seat. "And you? What kind of game are you playing, Maxwell? First the doctored contract, now my wife?" "Tony, stop it! You're making a scene!" Angelica hissed, her hand fluttering towards his arm. "A scene?" Tony laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the now silent restaurant. "You think this is a scene? I demand an explanation, now!" Angelica's composure, already cracking, began to crumble. She glanced at Maxwell, then back at Tony, a flicker of panic in her eyes. "It was him, Tony!" she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Maxwell. He made me! He pressured me to convince you to sign that contract. He said he had things on me." Tony's grip on Maxwell tightened. "Is this true, you slimeball?" Maxwell, despite being manhandled, let out a low chuckle. "Oh, she's a piece of work, isn't she, Price?" He disentangled himself from Tony's grasp with surprising ease, smoothing down his shirt. Always looking for a scapegoat. He turned his cold eyes on Angelica. "Weren't you the one telling me how tired you were of living in Tony's shadow? How you deserved a bigger piece of the pie? Your fair share for all those years by his side?" Angelica flinched as if struck. She opened her mouth to retort, then closed it, a look of pure venom replacing her feigned distress. "I did it for us, Tony," she finally spat, her voice now clear and sharp, each word a perfectly aimed dart. "I wanted to help you, to secure our future." Tony couldn't believe his ears. The casual ease with which she twisted the truth, the sheer audacity of her lies, was breathtaking. He turned back to Maxwell, his fury now a cold, lethal rage. "And you, Maxwell? You saw an opportunity, didn't you? Get access to a competitor's assets, cripple my company, and... What? Seduce my wife as a bonus?" Maxwell's smirk widened. He leaned back, the picture of arrogance. "You figured it out, Price. Smart man. But you know what? There's not a damn thing you can do about it now. She was mine for the taking, and she'll stay mine." That was the final straw for Angelica. With a furious cry, she snatched her wineglass from the table and hurled its crimson contents directly into Maxwell's smug face. Then, without a backward glance at either man, she turned on her heel and strode out of the bistro, her head held high, leaving a trail of stunned silence and the sharp scent of spilled Cabernet in her wake. Tony stood there, rooted to the spot, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a crushing weight of despair. His world had just imploded. The wreckage of the scene at Serafina's replayed in Tony's mind. Angelica's venomous confession, Maxwell's sneering triumph, the shattered illusion of his marriage. He was left standing amidst the debris, the whispers of the other diners like vultures circling. This wasn't just about a crooked business deal anymore. It was a betrayal that cut to the very core of his existence. His business, his marriage, his reputation, all lay in ruins, orchestrated by the two people he'd, in different ways, allowed closest to him. Shaking, he fumbled for his phone. There was only one person he could think of, one person who might possess the unique combination of skill, integrity, and perhaps a shared understanding of being targeted by ruthless forces. Victoria Evans, the quiet cleaner who was secretly a legal eagle. His fingers trembled as he dialed her number, a number he'd memorized after their encounter in the archive. He needed more than just a PI now. He needed a legal mind, someone who understood the labyrinthine world of corporate law, and crucially, someone who wasn't already compromised. Hello? Victoria's voice, calm and steady, was a lifeline in the storm raging within him. Victoria, it's Tony Price, he said, his own voice hoarse, barely recognizable. I need your help. Not just as a witness. I need a lawyer, a real one, and I think you're the only one I can trust. A brief silence on the other end, then, Mr. Price, Tony, what's happened? There was a note of concern, perhaps even a premonition in her tone. He took a shaky breath and poured out the sordid tale. Angelica's affair with Maxwell, their conspiracy, the true venomous motive behind the doctored contract, a hostile takeover fueled by greed and personal vendetta. He spared no detail, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and despair. When he finally finished, the silence stretched for a few heartbeats. Tony could almost hear her processing the information, her sharp legal mind dissecting the facts. I understand, Victoria said at last, her voice firm, devoid of surprise, as if she'd been expecting a call like this, a crisis of this magnitude. This is a far more complex and dangerous situation than even I suspected. You're not just fighting for your company, Tony. You're fighting for your life, your reputation. They won't stop until they've destroyed you. I know, Tony admitted, the stark reality of her words hitting him hard. What do I do? First, Victoria said, her tone shifting, becoming more professional, the lawyer taking charge. We need to assume that this fraudulent contract isn't their only weapon. People like Maxwell and, it seems, your wife, don't do things by halves. We need to meticulously review every single document related to Price Holdings, every recent transaction, every partnership agreement. We're looking for other planted explosives, other legal traps. We need to be prepared for an all-out assault, legally and personally. A sliver of hope, fragile but persistent, began to flicker within Tony. Victoria's calm competence was an anchor. I don't even know where to begin, he confessed. My entire life feels like it's built on quicksand. To think Angelica, my own wife, could plot this with that snake Maxwell. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment now, Tony, Victoria cautioned, though her voice was not unkind. In situations like this, it's vital to remain objective. You might be too close to see all the angles. There could be other players, other motives we haven't uncovered yet. Tony knew she was right. He'd been blinded by his assumptions, by his own life. I know this is overwhelming, Victoria continued, but if you want me to take this on, to officially represent you, we need to gather irrefutable evidence. I'll prepare a comprehensive action plan. Stage 1, forensic accounting and document review. Stage 2, background checks on everyone even remotely connected to Maxwell and Angelica, looking for leverage points or co-conspirators. Stage 3, damage control for your reputation, because they will try to smear you publicly. The tension in Tony's shoulders eased slightly. He had a plan. He had an ally. I'll start gathering everything I can right now, he said, a new resolve hardening his voice. When can we meet? Properly, to go over everything? Give me 2 hours to clear my decks, Victoria replied. I'll text you an address. It's discreet. We'll start with the document analysis. I'll make a checklist of everything we need to scrutinize. Thank you, Victoria, Tony said, a wave of gratitude washing over him. I'll be there. He hung up, the bistro's chaos fading. He had a fight on his hands, but for the first time in days, he didn't feel entirely alone. For the next few days, Victoria Evans's small, unassuming apartment in a quiet Queens neighborhood became Tony Price's sanctuary and war room. It was a world away from his opulent penthouse, filled instead with the comforting clutter of a real life. Iris's colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator, stacks of books, the faint scent of home-cooked meals. Here, surrounded by evidence of Victoria's hidden strength and resilience, Tony felt a sense of focus he hadn't experienced in weeks. Together, they pored over mountains of documents, financial statements, emails, and legal briefs. Each piece of paper was a potential clue, each clause a possible landmine. Victoria, with her sharp legal mind and meticulous attention to detail, was relentless. She navigated the complex legal jargon with an ease that belied her current life as a cleaner, her insights often unearthing subtleties Tony himself had missed. The picture emerging was terrifying. Angelica and Maxwell hadn't just faked one contract. They'd laid a network of intricate traps designed to systematically dismantle Price Holdings and discredit Tony utterly. It was a conspiracy of breathtaking audacity, fueled by greed and a chilling level of malice. Time was running out. Tony could feel his empire, his very identity, crumbling around him. Victoria was his rock, her calm determination a counterpoint to his rising panic. He watched her as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, methodically building their defense, plotting their counterattack. He knew she was risking everything by helping him, dredging up a past she'd fought so hard to escape. "I think we should subpoena additional records," Victoria said late one afternoon, her finger tracing a line on a complex shareholding agreement. "Specifically, anything related to this shell corporation Maxwell used to acquire shares in a subsidiary. I'm certain it's just the tip of the iceberg. Your assistant, Jenkins, his signature is on some of these transfers. Was he coerced or a willing participant?" "Agreed," Tony said, running a tired hand through his hair. He noticed the faint shadows under Victoria's eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her coffee. "Vicky, are you okay? You look exhausted." "I'm fine," she replied, a little too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired." But her voice betrayed the strain. Tony didn't press, but a seed of unease took root. Suddenly, her cheap burner phone, the one she used for essential untraceable calls, buzzed sharply on the table. It was an unknown number. Victoria visibly tensed. Tony saw her face pale, her eyes fix on the vibrating device as if it were a venomous snake. This wasn't just any call. Her reaction told him it was one she'd been dreading. She let it ring 3 times, her breath catching in her throat, before finally answering, her voice a tight, "Yes?" A coarse, menacing male voice erupted from the speaker, loud enough for Tony to hear. "You still don't get who you're dealing with, do you, sweetheart?" The voice was low, gravelly, dripping with threat. Tony's blood ran cold. This wasn't Maxwell or some corporate shark. This was something far darker. Victoria went white as a sheet. "Thought you could hide from us forever," the voice sneered. "We know you've been digging where you shouldn't. We know you're helping Price. Drop it. Now. Or we'll give you a little reminder of what happens to people who cross us, starting with that pretty little girl of yours." Tony watched, horrified, as Victoria slowly lowered the phone, her eyes wide with terror. She stared blankly ahead, her body rigid. The silence in the small apartment was suffocating. Then a choked sob escaped her lips. "What is it, Vicky? Who was that?" Tony asked, his voice urgent, though he already suspected the horrifying truth. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "The people I ran from. They found me. They're threatening Iris." Her composure shattered, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Oh God, Tony. My daughter. They'll hurt her. These aren't idle threats. They never are." The raw terror in Victoria's voice sliced through Tony. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. It was visceral, aimed at an innocent child. He moved to her side, placing a hesitant hand on her trembling shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. He could feel the waves of fear rolling off her as she fought for control. "They're threatening Iris," she repeated, her voice a broken whisper, her eyes fixed on some unseen horror. I I can't lose her, Tony. If they decide to make an example, they'll stop at nothing. We'll protect her, Vicky, Tony said, his voice firm despite the knot of fear in his own stomach. He met her gaze, seeing the desperate plea in her eyes. You're not alone in this. I'll help you. A flicker of something gratitude, perhaps, or a desperate, fragile hope surfaced in her eyes. Iris was her anchor, her reason for enduring years of fear and hiding. The thought of that bright little girl in the hands of such ruthless criminals was unbearable. Are you sure, Tony? She asked, her voice weak. You don't know these people. They're monsters. I'll do whatever it takes, he vowed. We find out who's behind this and we stop them. They won't get away with threatening you or your daughter. Victoria nodded slowly, drawing a shuddering breath. Thank you, Tony, she whispered. But we have to be incredibly careful. We're playing a very dangerous game now. One wrong move. I know, Tony said, his jaw tight. He knew they were out of their depth with organized crime. He pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying across the screen. There was only one person he knew who could navigate these treacherous waters, someone with the authority and the guts to stand up to the city's underbelly. Dave Miller, an old friend from his college days, now a detective with the NYPD, tough as nails and fiercely loyal. Their paths had diverged, but the bond remained. Tony took a steadying gulp of water from a glass on the table, then hit dial. Dave, it's Tony Price. I need your help, urgently. His voice was calm, but the undercurrent of desperation was unmistakable. On the other end, Dave Miller's familiar, slightly cynical voice responded. Price, well, to what do I owe the honor? Finally decided to trade in those skyscrapers for a jail cell? Despite the teasing tone, Tony could hear the underlying warmth. Not funny, Dave. This is serious. Life and death serious. Can you come to an address I'll text you? It's complicated. Better explained in person, Tony replied, not wanting to discuss the details over an unsecured line. An hour later, Dave Miller, solid and reassuring in his off-duty jeans and leather jacket, stood in Victoria's small living room. Tony quickly filled him in on Victoria's past, the threats, and the danger to Iris. Dave listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. You always did have a knack for finding trouble, Tony, Dave said, shaking his head, though there was no judgment in his voice. But this is a whole different league. These aren't just white-collar crooks. Victoria, who had been sitting pale and silent, finally spoke, her voice strained. Detective Miller, they've threatened my daughter Iris. If they find out I'm cooperating with Tony, helping him expose Maxwell and his associates, they'll come for her. Dave's gaze softened as he looked at Victoria. He was a father himself. Then she's not staying here, he said decisively. She can stay with me and my family. We have a spare room. She'll be safe. I'll make sure of it. Tears of relief welled in Victoria's eyes. Are you sure? I couldn't ask. Don't worry about it, Miss Evans, Dave said gently. I'll take good care of her. But we need to act fast before these scumbags make their next move. He looked at Tony. You realize, if these are the kind of people Victoria says they are, Maxwell might just be a pawn in a much bigger game. Just as Dave was preparing to leave with a hastily packed bag for Iris, who Victoria had quietly called home from a neighbor's, explaining only that she was going on a special sleepover, Jack Rourke, the PI, called Tony's phone. Tony, it's Rourke. You need to hear this, now. Meet me at the usual spot and come alone. Rourke's voice was tight with an urgency Tony had never heard from him before. Something big had broken. The Stardust Diner was almost deserted at this late hour. Jack Rourke sat hunched over a cup of coffee, looking more haggard than usual. The air crackled with unspoken revelations. What did you find, Jack? Tony asked, sliding into the booth, his nerves frayed. Rourke leaned in, his voice a low conspiratorial whisper. This goes way deeper than Maxwell and your charming wife, Price. We've been tracking the money, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts, and all roads lead to one name, Albert Al Simmons. Tony's blood ran cold. Al Simmons. The name was whispered in the darkest corners of the city, a phantom kingpin who controlled a vast, shadowy empire of extortion, racketeering, and God knows what else. He was untouchable, a legend. Simmons? Tony breathed. Are you sure? Positive, Rourke confirmed, sliding a grainy surveillance photo across the table. It showed Angelica, looking chic and confident, shaking hands with a smiling Al Simmons outside a discreet downtown club. She wasn't just Maxwell's lover, Price. She was Simmons's inside woman, his key to unlocking your empire. Maxwell was just the pretty face, the enforcer. This whole thing was orchestrated by Simmons, likely as a way to launder money through a legitimate-looking acquisition like Hudson Yards, and to settle some old score with you we haven't dug up yet. Victoria Evans wasn't wrong about who she crossed. The pieces slammed into place with horrifying clarity. Angelica, Al Simmons, the mob. This was a takedown of epic proportions. What now? Tony asked, his voice hollow. Now, Rourke said, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. We hand this over to people who can use it. Your friend Detective Miller, the feds. With Victoria's testimony about her past with Simmons's cronies, and our financial trail, we can bring the whole damn house of cards down. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal battles, witness protection for Victoria and Iris, and intense investigations. The unholy trinity of Angelica Price, Victor Maxwell, and the notorious Al Simmons found themselves facing a barrage of federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, extortion. The trial was a media circus. Tony and Victoria, now key witnesses, endured relentless cross-examinations. But the evidence, meticulously gathered by Rourke and corroborated by Victoria's chilling testimony about Simmons's organization, was undeniable. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Tony sat beside Victoria, her hand gripping his for support. Angelica, stunning even in a severe navy suit, maintained an icy composure. Maxwell looked deflated, his usual arrogance gone. Al Simmons, a surprisingly nondescript man for such a feared figure, simply stared ahead, his expression unreadable. The judge's voice boomed through the silent courtroom. On the charges of conspiracy to commit racketeering, fraud, and extortion, this court finds the defendants, Angelica Price, Victor Maxwell, and Albert Simmons, guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Given the severity of these crimes, their impact on countless lives, and the calculated malice involved, this court sentences each of you to 10 years in a federal correctional facility. A wave of relief washed over Tony. Victoria squeezed his hand, tears streaming down her face. It was over. Justice, however delayed, had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, blinking in the sudden sunlight, they were met by a small figure darting through the crowd. "Mommy!" Iris launched herself into Victoria's arms. "Does this mean we don't have to hide anymore?" Victoria hugged her daughter fiercely, her own tears now ones of joy. "No, my love, we're free. We can finally live our lives." She looked at Tony, her eyes shining. "We did it, Tony. Thanks to you. And Iris's sharp eyes." "You helped me just as much, Vicky," Tony said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You know, Price Holdings is going to need a new in-house counsel. Someone tough, smart, and not afraid to get their hands dirty. And who knows their way around a vacuum cleaner." He winked. Victoria laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Price?" "Only if you think you can handle cleaning up my legal messes as well as you cleaned my office," he grinned. "I think," she said, meeting his gaze, her smile radiant, "I'm more than qualified." As they walked away, Iris skipping happily between them, the concrete jungle of New York suddenly seemed a little less menacing, a little more hopeful. They had faced the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, ready for a new dawn.